We're definitely betting on the future where things are happening on chain, where a lot of productive economic activity is happening on chain.
And I think you've seen in the last year or two, it's like, what's going to be the big moment for crypto? And we probably need mobile applications. So you need security on your phone, for example, not just in your ledger. That's definitely going to be a thing where crypto gets adopted, and payments is perfect for that.
Before we get moving on today's episode, just a quick disclaimer. The views expressed on this podcast by either myself, my co-host, or any guests are their personal views and do not represent the views of any associated organization. Nothing in the episode should be construed or relied upon as financial, technical, tax, legal, or any other advice. Okay, let's jump into the episode. All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Lightspeed. This is a special day. We've got a bit of a homecoming. We got Garrett Harper making his re-debut, but this side on the other side of the fence. And Garrett, welcome back. And you're joined by the one and the only Stepan on this side, joined by Squads Protocol. So first of all, congrats on the raise. 10 million Series A led by Electric Capital. But guys, welcome on the show.
Thanks for having us.
I'm interested in the story, right? So I believe you guys did a hackathon on Solana way back, and then you started slowly building things and adding things to the protocol as you saw fit. And then now you're expanding, you just raised a Series A. So I think it'd be valuable to maybe talk about the story of how you got here and why you're doing what you're doing.
I think the story is kind of started, I think, in early summer 21. When I joined the hackathon information chat that Solana had for Solana season hackathon. And me and my co-founder, Danny, who I used to know for sort of almost 10 years, we just put together a two-pager saying, we think Solana is really cool, it's fast, it's cheap, we can focus on consumer stuff. So we're trying to build what Balaji would talk about back then, like a group chat with a bank account or like Telegram with a multi-sig. And so that was the original idea for Squads. And as we kind of were starting to build it out, we realized that there are none of the primitives that should kind of exist at first for us to be able to deliver such a product to the ecosystem. And so we then transitioned to focus on kind of all-in-one DAO infrastructure, right? And so I think that was like the second iteration of our vision. That's when we kind of formed the company and sort of raised the first round. And so we went full-time by around September 21. And then we started kind of building this DAO infrastructure, started talking to different teams and users in the ecosystem, and we realized that not many of them are actually DAOs. Like they're centralized teams, companies building products, iterating, having a vision. They're building companies. They're not building like decentralized communities. And so that really made us think, okay, what is the, out of all the DAO infrastructure, what is the tool that's absolutely necessary for all of these users? And I think the other thing we realized at the time is like when you make things really cheap and fast, a lot more like it used to be that just DAOs use like Safe on the VM, right? Because Safe would be pretty expensive. You need this kind of decentralized on-chain infrastructure for decentralized communities because they don't have really other options, right? Because they can't really use a bank account. But then on Solana, what we saw is that a lot of these teams would actually opt in to use an on-chain infra for their centralized operations. They would put their VC raised money in there. They would manage their developer workflows. They would manage their program upgrades. Eventually, we kind of discovered that validators and tokens also kind of come into the picture. And so we're really focused on a multi-sig infrastructure powering an app that would be like an enterprise facing app for these teams to just, instead of like opting in for a bank account and a bunch of other tools, they would just say, okay, we just have a squad, we have USDC, and we're sort of good to go. And so that really put us on the journey that we're still on. And I think the first iteration of Squads app and the protocol like had its sort of drawbacks. We had to go back to the drawing board at sort of I think early summer 22, pretty much a year after we started doing this, and we kind of redesigned the protocol, really thinking about security and talking to because I think the first iteration of Squads was really about we tried to do like a shiny UI and basically lure people in with the product. And then we kind of realized that all these teams, when we would talk to them about, hey, do you want to use Squads? We just built it for you. They'd be like asking this, the CTO, like the very technical person to evaluate, and they don't care about the UI. Like they actually cared about, is it open source? Is it audited by the right teams? like, is the program small enough so they can like review it themselves? And so we redesigned the protocol that was our V3 iteration that really kind of took off. And then once FTX collapse happened, also a lot of teams realized, because a lot of teams used to hold money on FTX, and then they realized, okay, we can't really trust centralized parties anymore. And so we had like another inflow of Solana native teams and a bunch of institutions saying, okay, we're actually going to opt in for like a completely on-chain version of that. And then the next iteration of the protocol and the product really would try to bring it as close as possible to like the neobank SaaS experience that these teams basically have come to know. And I think that also really worked. And so we're kind of in that phase where we're still iterating and trying to optimize the experience as much as possible. So Squad's app is like the home base for everything, like for all the workflows that these teams need to run on chain. And then kind of Fuse naturally grew from that because we saw a lot of individual users come to the Squads app and actually use it individually. They would have like 2 ledgers and a Phantom, and we realized, well, that's super clunky. Like they need to like connect different wallets, and it's just not the optimal experience. And so really Fuse was like, okay, how can we bring smart accounts to mobile? Because we had this idea like we need some kind of mobile presence. We think a lot of things are going to be happening on mobile. And the second one was, how do we like make these users that are using Squads directly like more comfortable, because they're using an enterprise platform that's not really kind of purpose built for them. And so that's kind of how Fuse grew out of that. And that also naturally made us think in very different terms about the protocol itself, like how smart accounts are actually, it's like multi-sig is just one way you can configure a smart account. And then like you can play around with, spending limits, key rotation for other kind of purposes, and not specifically for, a bunch of people trying to manage assets together.
Yeah, and I can touch on the smart accounts. I think one thing that stuck out to me when I joined Squads is just how it's really a product company. And it's interesting, like crypto 2 to 3 years ago, everyone just talked about protocols. Like you had Ethereum and then you had protocols built on top. So like Uniswap is called a protocol. And it's like only recently, I think, across every ecosystem, but it's been this way in Solana for a while. Do people think like applications? And by that, I just mean they think product first. So every like decision that Step does is always from this like product perspective. And that's where we started with infrastructure, which is Squad's protocol. And so it's like, okay, that's cool, but you have to build things on top that people actually want to use. And that's why we have the Squads app, that's really for enterprises. Now we have Fuse, that's for consumers. Then we have this other side that maybe Steph can talk on later that we call like smart accounts as a service. And to just go into what smart accounts are, trying to avoid the technical talk because it's not really me. On Solana, in most blockchains, you have like program accounts where you actually put the code and you can design programs. And then you have data accounts. Data accounts are really simple. They're non-programmable and they're controlled by a private key. Everybody kind of knows their seed phrase. If you have it, someone else gets it, all your funds are gone. The cool thing about smart accounts is it really just makes it where you can add code to these accounts and make them programmable. And then you can do a lot with that. So I was exploring for a long time how to explain this to somebody that's not in crypto. And the best thing I've got is I saw this thing on Steve Jobs back in 2007 when he was releasing the iPhone. He had this picture of a BlackBerry on a PowerPoint. And he said, that's the problem. And he pointed at it. And it's like, it's the bottom 40. And it's like, what's the bottom 40? The bottom 40 is the plastic keyboard that's on the iPhone. He's like, the problem is it's plastic. It's always there. No matter what app you're using, it can't adjust the use case. So it's basically non-programmable. So like, say you're playing a game on the phone, you don't need your standard keyboard, right? It should actually react and update based on what you're doing and also just based on the user. That's what smart accounts more or less do. They provide like programmable interface for you to be able to create a customized experience for a user and also developers. So that's kind of the easiest way for me to think about it. And once you have that programmability, you can start off with things that we'll go into like spending limits and 2-factor authentication. You can get rid of seed phrases and have things like recovery keys, which most people talk about as social recovery. But you can just go on from there. But I would say our more focus with that programmability is security. And that's really what Squads is all about.
The king of analogies is so back. I love it. That was great, Garrett. But Steph, you mentioned the Fuse there, and I want to like kind of peel back the layers on that. So I like how you have the two approaches, one of more this like enterprise application for DAOs, which I do want to dive into in a second, but starting with Fuse, that more consumer focused application. This has been an interesting like thought experiment that I've had for a while is, today you log in, you get like a Phantom or like a MetaMask UI that pops up, you get the clunky seed phrase, and you still have like the weird browser wallet integration thing that doesn't like make sense to most users. And self-custody is great. I love the optionality that crypto provides to be your own sovereign individual with your own sovereign money. I love that aspect. But the reality of it is people like simplicity, probably at the expense of security in a lot of cases. And so I'm glad to see that you're making this effort to make wallets easier to interact with. Can you kind of like expand on what you mean when you say Fuse is really built for the individual consumer, and what Garrett just kind of rattled off a few of its really great feature sets. If you can expand on some of those.
Absolutely. So I think the way to think about Fuse is that it's the most secure place to store sort of your Solana assets, and I think that's kind of Garrett mentioned exactly right, that like we're definitely the first thing we're focusing on is security as opposed to kind of other things, right? And so the push we're making right now with Fuse is to make it the place, like once you kind of interacted with the ecosystem through Phantom or Backpack, like we're definitely not trying to compete with those guys, because they're solving a very different problem. Like they're solving the most intuitive way for you to do stuff on Jupiter or trade and drift. Our idea is that Fuse is here. Once you've traded and you made a bunch of money, this is where you move like 80% of that you don't intend to sort of interact with day to day. Right. And so I think that's where we're really heavily kind of leaning in with smart accounts, because we can now offer, two-factor authentication. That's kind of how Fuse is coming out of the box. You've got different recovery keys. So right now we're offering up to 3. And then there's spending limits if you have, additional 2FA set up with Ledger, and then we're going to open up kind of more possibilities for different 2FA capabilities. And so I think really the focus of Fuse is to solve the security component first. And then we can also, I think that the second stage of Fuse will really be showcasing like what you can do with programmability when you're thinking about it in terms of like, this is, it's not about interacting with other things, but Fuse is sort of the destination. What kind of things and features can you program and offer to a user that make it a very different experience? Like one example could be, for example, where if you send, USDC to your Fuse wallet, you can program that 25% of that would like auto DCA into Sol through Jupiter, right? And so that could be basically like a completely automated setting within the wallet. And so I think that's where a lot of the focus around Fuse for us will be, as opposed to saying like, hey, this is, another wallet that's easy to set up, but then like go and, play around with the ecosystem with it. So I think that's kind of one big thing around Fuse. And I think secondly, it's really it's trying to dance between these like two groups of like power users who kind of understand what a smart account is, who trust Squad's protocol already, and it's just solving this UX problem for them because they're using Squad's app directly and they want a better experience. And then the kind of second group would be a user coming to the Solana ecosystem, doing stuff. And like you can see these like tweets a lot, like saying, "Oh my god, I have so much money in my hot wallet. Like, where do I put it?" And people are like, "Hey, you should buy Ledger and like you should order a cold wallet." And I think that's definitely a good start. But we think that the smart account with key rotation, because again, I think once you've got your Ledger, like you've got your seed phrase, like basically the seed phrase is the only condition that's required to access your assets. And I think that's kind of the problem, right? So I think with Fuse, you get this new unlock of progressive custody and programmable custody, because you can say, okay, I have this Ledger, like it's only one of the signers on my smart account, and then you can have recovery via email, via another Ledger, via a friend's wallet, and so on, right? And then I think the other core aspect here, because we just announced a kind of Fuse public test flight and people ask a lot about Android, I think the fact that we are kind of more slow in terms of Android support is because we definitely are heavily leveraging Apple sort of security model with, biometric verification and a bunch of, because the fact that like Apple is quite, close as a system, closed-ended as a system, I think like that allows us to make a more secure wallet experience, which we are more comfortable with in terms of delivering to the user. And I think we will kind of figure out how it can, apply to Android. I think Saga would be a much, easier move for us because it has the seed vault and like we can leverage those things. And so definitely that's a very important, component. Like even, when we talk about Fuse, we say it's like powered by Squad's protocol and iOS. It's not just built on iOS, but it's also actually like pretty heavily leveraging what iOS has to offer. So yeah, that's how we think about it in a nutshell.
All right, I got to add 2 things. One, Stepan was talking about the programmability with the USDC. Like that's such a cool use case to me. We used to talk about a lot. Like to get people onboarded to crypto, I think the best way to do that is to get them paid on chain, and that's one reason Deepin's so cool. Well, if I could get I get paid on chain. If I could get say 10% of that sent to me, automatically say staked, so it buys Sol with my USDC, it then stakes that Sol, and then it puts it into like a time locked vault, which is something else you can do with programmability, where say like, I can't withdraw from this vault. It takes 48 hours for that to actually like happen, for that transfer to happen, which I really like. One, because it gives you like diamond hands, because I've had many times where I've kind of freaked out with the market and I want to like insta sell, and then that was a bad decision. And then also, if you think that you've lost your wallet, you lost your phone, and you haven't recovered it yet, it gives you that like, okay, you have 48 hours. So I just think that's a really cool feature. And Fuse is really for security conscious people that are already using Ledger. But it's also perfect for someone that was like me when I first got into crypto, or really my first 2.5 years in crypto. I got Phantom, which is awesome. I use it every day. But I took that seed phrase and I copy and pasted it in a Google Doc. And then I went and got Backpack and I copy and pasted that seed phrase. Or no, I didn't even copy and paste it. I took a photo of it and kept it in my Apple Photos. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but I guarantee you, at least like 50% of the people listening to this podcast have done that before. So this is something that completely extracts and abstracts that process, and you have security by default. So that's why I think it's really cool.
Awesome.
My friends, big news. Blockworks is hosting Permissionless 3 in Salt Lake City this year, so we're heading west for 3 days starting October 9th. Permissionless is our industry's premier DeFi event that brings together crypto natives from all over the globe. I've personally been the last 2 years and can honestly say that the attendees are incredible. It's people who actually care about crypto. We'll also have more than 200 industry titans speaking at the event, and this includes builders like Lucas Bruder from Judo Labs and Brian Pellegrino from Layer Zero, or investors like Kyle Samani and Joe McCann, and even elected officials like Representative Tom Emmer, who is fighting the good fight in Washington. And it's narrative season, so we're going to be covering the 7 hottest themes in crypto. This includes things like modularity and restaking, or Bitcoin and L2s, and even AI and crypto. The goal is to keep you up to speed on major developments in the industry. Ticket prices will be structurally increasing over time, so get your ticket today. For my Lightspeed family, I got you. We're going to use code Lightspeed10 in all caps, no space, for 10% off your ticket. All right, everyone. I look forward to seeing you at Permissionless 3, and let's get back to the show.
Well, talking about security, actually, one of the things that most people don't know, and I think should be highlighted much more, is Squads. I think one of the programs is the first and only fully immutable program on Solana, frozen, and also formally verified, which is a pretty big guarantee. And you don't really have that anywhere on Solana. So I'm curious, first, what was that like? Like, what was that? Was that what was a process? And also, what do you think of the state of that entire, programs being immutable and whatnot for security reasons on Solana? Like, for example, just to give the audience some context, we use Squads for our on-chain treasury and all payments and all types of different wallets. And it's the only thing I feel comfortable actually storing money in and off-ramping and on-ramping and stuff like that. So it actually does make a pretty big difference.
The first question in terms of the journey, like to formal verification, why we even sort of did it, was really because when I sort of got into figuring out the right design for the protocol from my like a CEO kind of perspective, talking to Sean, my co-founder, who was the technical lead, I had these like very clear cues from our users and who were saying like, we want that, we want this. And somebody brought it up. I think it could have been, maybe it was Edgar from Margin 5, maybe it was someone else, but somebody brought it up very like back in the day and kind of jokingly, in a sense where like asking, is Squads formally verified? And knowing that it's not, and like and not expecting like the answer that it is or it will be. And so that kind of put a sort of chip on our shoulder. We're like, okay, we got to, somehow figure it out. And so once Squads v3 was a bunch of times audited, I was talking to Robert from OtterSec and saying, okay, what else? Like, I understand how sort of security audits work. I understand the process now. What's the next level? And he was like, formal verification. And I kind of remember that. And we started talking about how to even achieve it, because at the time there was no framework that would apply to Solana.
Can you actually define what it is as well? Just sorry.
So I think the best way I've come to be able to describe it was, when you think about like a security audit, when you hire like an auditor, they really look at the code and think like, an attacker, and try to find sort of vulnerabilities that they can exploit. Formal verification is a very different process. It's basically, you break down the code base into math, and you prove it as you prove different properties of that mathematically, right? And so you can mathematically say the program does this or it doesn't do that. And so that's a very different approach, where like there's sort of less thinking around, how can somebody exploit it? There's much more thinking around like, what are the core properties? And, can we mathematically verify what are the right sort of outputs? And if something is off, like that can showcase that, okay, this is not what the program was supposed to do. And so we started talking about this with Robert, and it was like a big project for OtterSec. We sort of engaged them to figure out what's the right framework and how to do it. And we were sort of Squads v3 was the first program to be formally verified on Solana. And then sort of since then, Certora, who sort of specializes on formal verification, also got really involved in the ecosystem. And then we did sort of for V4, the next iteration of the protocol, we did both Certora and Autosec. And I think that process, at least to me, as somebody who, is actively talking to users who are, using this, app and protocol every day, like that gives me great comfort that like, at least this is a very kind of different sort of next level thing that we can deliver in terms of security. I think for the ecosystem broadly, it's harder, right? Because for example, Squads V4, we shipped the protocol went into production, I think in September 23. Since then, we did one upgrade, right? And in December 23, we haven't touched the on-chain code since. So that allows us to have it formally verified every time, right? Because like we upgraded it so rarely, the program is simple enough for us to never have to do it, that we can like formally verify and like update the formal verification every time, because otherwise it's going to be too long. Because like, a lot of these like DeFi protocols, they need upgrading sort of every week, every couple of weeks. And so that becomes completely unsustainable. I think once, these kind of large DeFi protocols get to a place where, majority, they're like feature complete and like most things are kind of figured out, I think a lot of them should, and I hope they will sort of embrace formal verification as well. It's costly, it takes time, but it's definitely worth it, particularly if you're sort of optimizing for security, which I think kind of everybody should. I think in terms of immutability, that was another like user ask. Like we've got a lot of requests around how, when the program will be immutable. And so I think we had this like countdown in terms of like, we had like a public checklist on Twitter, like what are the things we need to do before we make it immutable. And so that kind of really worked out and gave a lot of confidence to people to continue using the protocol, and like new users also started coming in. I think immutability right now, when we talk to, because there's a lot of kind of, there's different opinions. Like some of the larger users we talk to actually say we would prefer if the program was upgradable, because we think that, you are, funded, you're motivated to continue sort of iterating on the program, making it, more secure over time, making it more optimized, making it a better experience, but also the fact that like you are going to be there, for during the best and the worst. When the program is immutable, really, there's not much you can do, despite the fact that we're still kind of playing around with it. And we're talking to some of the sort of security people about potential like, circuit breakers or some things that you can leave as like admin functions that, can remain in the program once it goes immutable. But I think for immutability, it's even harder for basically any other protocol than ours, just because ours is really static, as I kind of explained before, that like we don't really touch the on-chain code. Like all the upgrades and all the updates for the app that you see, they're all, front end and kind of and logic that's plugged into the program, but they're not the on-chain code. So I think it's definitely, we kind of expected more people to jump on formal verification once we did it, more than a year ago. But I think it just, it's kind of a thought after a certain period of your life cycle as a project that you start thinking about, okay, what else can we do on the security side?
I think formal verification is really cool and it's going to take off. Immutability, I don't know what Step actually thinks on this, but I feel comfortable saying it. I think you should always have the option for an immutable protocol. Like you should have an option for that. So there should be a multi-sig that's immutable. And that's the coolest thing about crypto. There's low like switching costs and you have that option. But I think the take that every protocol and application in crypto should be immutable is like the ultimate mid-curve take. So just leave it there.
Oh God.
Hold on. Expand on that.
Software has bugs and you have to update it. Like we're so early in the life cycle of crypto that I think to make anything immutable at this point, not anything, like we have V3, which is immutable. And I think that's awesome. If you're a team on Solana, you can use V3, it's free and it's immutable. But to say that like most protocols or applications on Solana or any ecosystem should be immutable, I think it's just way too early for that. And I think that's almost like looking against progress. Like you should be looking for things that are improving, and all of this is software, right? It's software that's really important in actually controlling your funds. And that's why Step, I know 24/7 is thinking about security. And that's what we have to do at Squad. The nice thing is once you have the programs deployed, I think it's like 99% of our code is not on chain. And that's true for any company in Solana that's building an application.
Does that mean L2s won't ever get rid of the multi-sigs?
I think that's a question for another ecosystem, but I think definitely there's value in keeping. I think what Garrett was trying to say is that immutability is decelerationist and upgradability is EAC. I think that was kind of where she was going. But I think I think some things should be immutable. Like for example, I think some very simple primitives definitely would benefit from that. Like for example, maybe like a very simple small lending protocol, which is like very liquid and just does like one pair or something. Like maybe that should be immutable, because then it does this one thing, it does it really well. But some things that need active development and iteration, they probably should stay upgradable. But I think, again, take cue from your users, right? Like if I think these L2s have tokens, maybe they can use them to vote on that. They can just go and have a proposal and say, okay, we want to make it immutable, and then let's see what the foundations do in not following the vote. So I think that's probably the best solution to the problem.
If everything goes immutable, governance tokens go to zero. So I think it's against everybody's best interest.
All right. What is the vision for squads? So it's a noisy world out there. People pay attention to all sorts of weird coins and stuff. When they hear the word squads, what do you want them to know in the end game?
I want them to know that we're definitely betting on the future where things are happening on chain, where a lot of productive economic activity is happening on chain, where merchants are transacting, where you hold your money, where you pay merchants, you send money between friends, you pay for services. Like that's definitely at the core of our vision, that we think all these things will eventually migrate on chain. And like one of our core beliefs is that this is going to happen. The other core belief is that blockchains will continue scaling and that they will get faster and cheaper over time. And so the protocol and the products that we're building are really betting on that future and making products and technology that is going to make that transition happen faster and make that kind of acceleration happen. And either through solving securities, solving UX, it really is centered around self-custody, right? So smart accounts are all about where the assets reside and who has access to them. But I think that's sort of when you think about squads, definitely what we want people to think about is definitely our mission in terms of growing the on-chain economy really translates into that. And the reason we're really excited for it is because we've been sort of on Solana for 3 years, and we are seeing that happen. Like a lot of these, for example, very centralized teams and companies that used to hold money in a bank or sort of with different centralized entities are now completely on chain. And they're completely comfortable. They're doing payroll on chain. They're paying for audits. They're paying for other services, for RPC providers, and so on, right? So I think like that's one of the more bullish things when we think about like our journey so far and where we're going. And I think that's definitely what gets us most excited. And so I think when people think about squads, we want them to think about these guys are trying to make this transition happen, and they're building really well-designed, well-crafted products and really secure tech to help us kind of bring that about quicker.
You mentioned you've been on Solana for 3 years. And my question is, why have you been on Solana for 3 years? Isn't it centralized vaporware?
It's a good question. I think for us, first of all, it's a kind of historical thing, right? Because we all, like, our whole team that was never really in Ethereum. Like Sean, my co-founder, was always in Bitcoin. Like he was mining Bitcoin for sort of the last 10 years or so. And so he kind of missed the Ethereum train. I was doing corporate M&A before I got into doing this, right? And so I think we just saw that really cool video for Solana Season Hackathon that had a bunch of like clips from movies and people talking about hacking on the blockchain. And we really liked the vibe. And then we joined the chat, and like the people were cool. And like we posted a 2-pager saying like, this is me and Danny, we're trying to do this thing on Solana. And then like 40 people responded because, we're both non-developers, right? We're more technical. We became more technical over the last 3 years, but we're not devs. And so the fact that like there are 40 developers now with us on a Zoom call after we just posted this like 2-pager was transformative for us as well. And so I think even a year later, we couldn't really imagine ourselves being anywhere else, because I think the sort of the culture of Solana, even like if you think about our tech and our product, they really are very in line with the ethos of the ecosystem, where we are building for sort of these teams that come to this place, and they're very much aligned because they're like they're building businesses first and foremost. They're thinking about revenue, and I think that's where a lot of the features we're trying to bring to squads also they come into play. And so definitely we feel like we wouldn't really exist well in other ecosystems. I think we've been approached before about going multi-chain. We also get this question a lot, like, why are you staying Solana only? And I think for us, it was always about, if you go like really deep and you basically can discover a lot more things, and you can build better features, you can build better products. Because right now, if we had to like support multiple chains, we wouldn't be able to sort of deliver as much value for our users that are here. And so our approach is really to kind of stay on Solana and make sure that our users here get the best experience possible. And there's still more work to be done, but I think that's definitely something we're prioritizing over kind of horizontal scaling to other places.
I think that approach makes a lot of sense, really, just given that one point you made about being able to go all in and really provide a deeply integrated solution to the problems that Solana, in this case, Solana-specific developers experience. An interesting twist on that question is, like, let's say there was an an SVM L2, where you use the same Solana code base and just like sort of, or even just a Solana fork in some regard, right? Like, there are chains that exist, and even like at one point MakerDAO was exploring forking the SVM and having its own chain, right? If you had this same equivalent environment, I could kind of see how it would make a little bit more sense, but I'm curious if you have any thoughts there.
I'll let maybe Garrett comment on sort of the broader picture of this, but I think the way I think about it is really, it's, the change in our approach can happen if our users kind of indicate to us that, we actually want to exist on this SVML2. Can you come there as well, right? I think that would be the biggest factor that we would consider. There are things that we definitely excited about. Like, for example, I'd love to have, squad support for Bitcoin in some shape or form, right? If there's like an SVM, I think there was one announced a couple of weeks ago, SVM Bitcoin L2, that was super interesting. But again, we wouldn't just deploy out of the blue and like try to figure out, who can we kind of service best in this ecosystem. I think the way for us to go there would be, for Jito or Helios to say, hey, we actually are going to do stuff in this ecosystem, and we need a good multi-sig. We need the right kind of app and experience to manage our assets there and secure our sort of treasuries and programs. I think that would be a really good signal, but I'm not really sure what else needs to happen for us to kind of make the transition. Garrett, maybe you can comment on kind of general sense around SVML2s as you see them.
Yeah, I mean, I really feel the same way as Stepan does, that like it's your customers that draw the product out of you. And like right now in Solana, I mean, just a year ago, most people thought Solana was dead. Now you have like John Collison talking about Solana, on one of their biggest meetings of the year. So it's been such a change. But when you think about that, it's only been a year. We're like kind of just getting started. Jito kind of kicked off the token, launch and airdrop trend that we've seen over the last few months, but that still has a long way to go in the number of like protocols and apps that we'll see on Solana. So in many ways, I think it'd be kind of silly to divert resources somewhere else. But at the same time, like, I think it's awesome that Eclipse is doing an SVM L2 and whoever else is. And the more widespread the SVM is, the better that the tooling gets. Something as like, when I was just podcasting and you think you know what you're talking about. And for me, and you hear about how important developer tools are. And I wasn't a developer tool, so you don't get that experience firsthand. But now, like being in the ecosystem and being all these chats with apps and infrastructure, you do see how important having these core primitives are, just like multi-sigs and smart accounts. And that's something as exciting as like Sui or Aptos or different move chains are. There's so much work to do just to get those core primitives to even have an application ecosystem. And I think that's something that I overlooked, and probably a lot of other people do. It's like, it's not even all about speed or latency, et cetera. Solana has that, and that's awesome, but it's also about the culture and the point that it has this network effect now. And that's something that we want to lean into.
Yeah, I mean, at the risk of shelling my bags here, that is also why we started Helios and why it's Solana only. Because turns out once you're vertically integrated and specialized in an ecosystem, people want to export that to other ecosystems. So with SVML2s, for example, but also just Cosmos things as well. And so we actually do plan to support a bunch of these SVML2s, mostly in stealth. And so that also means a world where squads also expands to them as well, because the infrastructure will be there. I also want to ask, as both a curious user and let's say an investor, I am an investor, what is the monetization strategy for squads? How do you guys make money?
We actually sort of pioneered the on-chain subscription model about a year ago that we started, and people surprisingly were really excited in the sense where we just said, a bunch of features in the app are gated by subscription. You pay it in USDC, and once you pay it, it unlocks the features. We're still very much experimenting with kind of what that actually means and how it works. I think we've got a really good response up to now, but we're at the kind of stage where we want to see how to take it to sort of the next level and what features are kind of pro, what features are free. But it was really important for us as like as a statement also, internally and externally, to show, okay, these are paid features, these are free features. We're definitely building a business here, and that's kind of the app monetization. There's also a small deployment fee per smart account that we charge, and so I think definitely that really bets on scale of smart account adoption, of squads adoption, of Fuse adoption. And so I think over time, we're definitely betting on growth of the smart account sort of infrastructure and can monetize through that. And then kind of the bigger bet, as we are kind of building out a lot of the tools around it, is really the kind of, Garrett touched on that earlier, is smart account as a service, right? This is the idea that you're as a developer, you're building an application, you have a component in your app and your protocol that deals with kind of user funds and in a place where your users will be keeping their kind of assets. You can build all that stuff yourself and then, try and audit it from verified, or you can pay a small fee and then create this smart account from Squads protocol that already secures over 10 billion in value and used by kind of all the major teams in the ecosystem to secure their assets, to just plug it into your protocol and use it like that. So I think definitely a lot of our monetization strategy will be kind of centered around the ecosystem growth as it has been so far. And both in terms of like developer adoption of smart accounts and kind of retail direct consumer adoption of smart accounts as well.
And expanding on this like business, from this business lens, it kind of feels like, especially from the Fuse angle, right? Like this looks more and feels more like a savings account. So which starts me thinking like, all right, well, what do traditional banks do that? What does my bank offer me when I like get the ability to, whether it be wire funds in the most basic form or, they like use my deposits, which I'm not at all suggesting is a good idea. But I'm curious, given that you have users and their in their funds in this one location, like what other services do you think about being able to offer the users? You're like, I feel like there's a couple different directions you could go with, given that you have that relationship with the user.
Yeah, I think one of the things we're still discovering is like, I think in crypto specifically, I think that there's also some kind of subscription FUD going on broadly beyond crypto. People are less excited about subscriptions than they used to be. And so I think a lot of the feedback we get from users is that we'd rather, pay one fee up front, let it be, a bigger fee, as opposed to something that, we have to do every month. And so we're thinking a lot about in terms of, kind of annual fee, annual subscription or something like that, where just, you kind of pay it once and you know exactly what the fee is. And then there's no swap fees. There's kind of no in-app fees that you kind of run. And so I think that's a lot of the feedback we get is really around there. I think one of the ideas that we are gravitating towards is basically having this kind of added value for your smart account, particularly like in Fuse context, for example, if you want to access, custodial recovery or fee-less off-ramp, right? That's where you would pay, an extra, maybe in the form of a yearly subscription, or we're still kind of discovering what exactly that will be. But so I think the focus will really be around like what's added value for your savings account and how we can, monetize for that, as opposed to saying like every swap has a fee, or, kind of anything that's kind of more concealed or in-app. I think we're trying to kind of go around. And so for Fuse, as we progress, like I think a lot of the features we want to introduce in Fuse, they will interact with DeFi, they will interact with other applications, and that will also give us an opportunity to, come up with an arrangement and have a fee structure that makes sense kind of for all the parties involved. But we definitely are prioritizing right now sort of the growth of smart accounts, and we definitely don't want to kill the party with kind of fees everywhere too early. And so I think, out of all the apps in even the crypto ecosystem, we are definitely kind of at the forefront of experimenting with business models and, trying some more traditional things, some less. But that definitely takes, kind of the growth definitely takes priority at this stage. That said, the stuff we already introduced was pretty successful, and so that gives us a lot of opportunity to continue iterating. And I think Fuse is an interesting one because we really haven't like had a consumer-facing product. And we're definitely interested to see kind of how users respond to things we're going to be introducing there.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is as you talk to more customers with, right now it's mostly Squads apps, so it's all the enterprises, protocols, but soon with Fuse, it's everyday consumers. You are solving one of their problems, but then you start noticing all of their other problems that they have. And I think if we could offer a service, and this is really any company, that more or less solves some of those problems, but it wraps it up into like one very seamless solution. I think there's a lot of value to give and also capture there. And like one high level example is if you did want to use services that require KYC with your wallet, obviously a lot of people don't, but some might, like maybe wallet recovery through a professional service could be something. Or maybe somehow you could tie your crypto wallet to Coinbase. I'm making this up. So you could actually like access their liquidity too. you would need KYC for those things. And how things work today is you have to like KYC with every single separate party. If you could somehow just make that, you do KYC once, you get access to all four, you automatically get an account set up, like that type of thing. I think that would be really cool.
Rolling back to one of the earlier things you said, this might have been one of the, in your responses, like the first question, but you mentioned DAO tooling. And that was kind of like one of the initial efforts you were making on the multi-sig side, is to service developers and DAOs. How has that journey gone for you thus far? And then further to that, like what improvements still needs to happen on like that DAO governance side of things, right? Like Solana's actually doing some really interesting governance experiments. You know, we have Futarchy coming live, and their Futarchy as a service. Solana, the base layer itself, is using like social voting through validators as well. So I think there's some interesting governance experiments going on over in Solana, but broadly, I think like DAOs as a whole are still like a fairly chaotic construct. And I'm just curious, as someone who's building DAO tooling, like how do you think about this?
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of our journey. Was like very much in the beginning, we were focusing on DAO tools, and like we thought, every kind of organization ecosystem would be a decentralized community that we need to service. And very quickly, we figured out that's actually not the case, right? Like these teams are actually building companies, and they're quite centralized. And so that really forced us to focus on the multi-sig. I think as we progressed, there are some DAOs that still use the multi-sig, but I think Solana DAOs are much more sort of opinionated. And I think on EVM, particularly back then, if you have a multi-sig and a snapshot kind of vote system, you're basically a DAO. I think on Solana, because sort of Solana SPL governance contract, which is kind of the main governance standard for the ecosystem, was really pushing for like a completely on-chain governance where, the token holders with their, tokens directly control the assets that the DAO manages, which is a very different kind of setup where, because in Snapshot, you just, you vote off chain and then the multi-sig of 5 people does the transaction, right? And so there's still an element of trust that you trust the people on the multi-sig. I think Solana from like 21 was really pushing this very kind of on-chain native DAO. And for us, it kind of felt like, we wanted to focus on something else. And so we really transitioned to kind of focus on the multi-sig. I think when I look at the Solana ecosystem right now, I see a lot more tokens being launched. It feels like there's more need for sort of governance infrastructure. And I think there are options, and I think there are cool experiments like sort of MetaDAO, I think is very interesting. I think for us, we're definitely seeing that there's there's room for a different approach to governance infrastructure and DAO tooling that we've seen so far. We're not really actively pursuing this, but we are interested, and I think that's something down the line might happen, might not. I'm still not sure. I think the way we think about governance right now, like the way we talk to sort of different teams, is that really governance is particularly like early stages of your life cycle as a project, when you just launched the token and you need to start thinking about it. Approaching governance is just like one of the workflows that needs to be solved for these teams, and it's very much I think a lot of the experiments on Solana are all about like different governance frameworks and like cool experiments. I think the way, if we are to approach this, it would really be in a sense of like, how can we solve this from a product perspective? Like, how can we make this workflow simpler and, easier to manage for the team that's actually trying to set it up? And how can, sort of the DAO holders get to their kind of, core purpose of voting on a proposal as quickly and reliably as possible? And so if we are to approach this, it definitely would be through the ethos that we have internally, where it's about building nice, efficient products that kind of help you get to things faster and do them better. So I think that's something that definitely is interesting to us. And we'll see how things evolve, but I think there's definitely a lot more. It became a lot more interesting now that a lot of these teams are setting up foundations and DAOs and launching their tokens. I think it's becoming a lot more relevant than it used to be.
From the angle of a delegate, that's a really, really interesting perspective. We as in Blockworks Research are delegates for Jito, and we use the squad's multi-sig just to hold our delegation funds. And it's kind of like overkill, but we try to go for best security practices. So that's great to hear. Is there anything you can expand on the governance side of things from the delegate perspective, just as a user? I'm super interested.
So I think as a delegate, I think right now the way it works, I think the biggest problem to solve, and the one that it is quite interesting to us, is like right now to vote on proposals, you have to redeposit liquid tokens into a governance contract, and then you get the vote weight, and then you vote. I think obviously a lot of the focus at Squads is really around, secure smart account infrastructure. So one of the problems that would be interesting for us to solve is how can you sort of retain the tokens in the smart account and then still get the vote weight to participate in the DAO without taking like double smart contract risk. I think that's something that is definitely interesting, but I don't have a solution for you on the podcast to sort of to explain how we can actually achieve it. But I think if we were to approach it, definitely that would be one of the bigger aspects, that everything kind of happens through smart accounts, and then you kind of get the all you need to do is put it in a squad, and then you get the vote weight, and you can then participate in governance. Because we do have a lot of these teams that hold large amounts of different tokens, whether they purchase them or they got them as grants, and they want to participate in governance. And a lot of the blockers is that like you need to manually move them to another contract. Somebody needs to be responsible for that because it needs to be done individually. And so I think solving that flow would be definitely an interesting challenge.
All right. So I like asking as the last question generally to founders, what is the number one lesson you learned so far as you've built Squads? Or if you had to, maybe if you were giving a lecture to Solana founders who are interested in maybe following the same journey, which has been quite successful, what would you tell them?
I would tell them, I had a tweet about it a couple days ago, but it's like, you must kind of stick to the vision and have this like very clear understanding. And it can change, but I think your understanding can even change like very often. But at the moment when you're defining what you're doing and like defining the product and setting the roadmap, you should have a very clear vision, despite the fact that it might change. But you should be really flexible sort of on the details, right? Because when you start talking to users, a lot of things will come out that you'll have to adjust. You just have to make sure that it's all kind of in line with where you're going, right? And so I think something that you get to like, program, like talk to your users, right? All that stuff. Like you definitely should talk to them and you should like extract as much information as possible. I think that's the most valuable kind of thing you can get from users, more valuable than money at early stages. Like don't try to monetize early, actually try to get more information out of them. But when you are bringing, these things and making them actionable, sort of bringing them to your team and making them actionable, definitely make sure that it's, there's a vision there that you're sticking to. Because I think that helped us along the way a bunch of times when we heard that, this is not, what we want, this is not going to work. And then we kind of, as you dive into the details and you actually like understand what the problem is for the user, you end up kind of adjusting the right things while maintaining what you actually were trying to do in the beginning. I think that's definitely the sort of the most interesting thing I learned so far.
Yeah, that is great advice. We also have one of our values is strong opinions loosely held, which is basically what you just said as well. So, Garrett, you seem like
well, not a founder, obviously. I'm just Steps hype man. But for anyone that's like in a role like mine, I'm head of business development, but I pretty much try to help with anything that's not developer related. Similar to what you just said about opinions, I think it's always have an opinion and like offer solutions. Don't just point out problems, especially on small teams. I think like the bigger company you're in, it's very easy to see something and not say something, like you don't agree with it and you just leave it alone because you're like, that's not my problem, right? Like you're reading something even on your team's landing page and you're like, well, that doesn't look that great. Like point it out. And then when you see something that's wrong, don't just point it out and say, hey, there's a problem here. Come up with like what you think a good solution is and have an opinion and actually like hold belief in that opinion. And I think that used to be really hard for me, but I think that's a really good takeaway, especially for people that are new in the job market or working on a small team.
Can I add one thing?
Yep.
I think like Keith Raboy, the one of the co-founders, I think, of PayPal, has this thing about like when you're hiring people, you should hire barrels. And what he means by that is like you should hire people that can take a problem and not just like solve the sort of the bare minimum, but actually like will try to take it as far as possible and like figure out like innovate along the way and really solve it for you, and also like take as much as possible off your plate. And I think that's where we got lucky with Garrett, because like definitely he does that a lot. And I think that's something when I'm hiring people now, like I'm prioritizing sort of people that not just do the thing we hire them for well, but who I understand like if they see a problem they can solve, they'll take as much as possible on. And I think that's definitely super valuable and something I'm kind of now on the lookout for.
Yeah, I think that's like the analogy he uses with the barrels and the bullets, where there's like the bullet, which just kind of does the job and then kind of goes away, but then the barrel, you have to point at it first as well.
One thing we didn't talk about on here at all that I just want to point out is that Fuse is a mobile application. It's a wallet that's actually on your phone. I just mentioned that because that's one of the big differences. Like when you think about Squads, the app, it's used by teams. Fuse is just used by individual users. And I think you've seen in the last year or two, it's like, what's going to be the big moment for crypto? And we probably need mobile applications for that to take off, because every person under 30, and I'm 31, is on their phone all damn day. So you need security on your phone, for example, not just in your ledger that's not on your phone and not with you. And I think that's a big thing that Fuse solves. And hopefully we have applications that kind of double down on like, what will people do on their phone? Because that's definitely going to be a thing where crypto gets adopted, and payments is perfect for that. And that's, I used USDC like paying with Sol Pay or Solana Pay the other day at the conference. I thought it was awesome. Mm-hmm. And that's all through your phone. So simple. So it's little things like that. And if that Sol Pay can be hooked up to your Fuse wallet, which it can, I think that's really cool.
The idea is that Fuse is sort of the place where you don't need to go anywhere else, right? Like we will come up with the right native integrations for you. So all you need is just, you create it, you move the funds in there, and then, you do DCA swap staking from it. And I think that's kind of a unique approach to Fuse that we have, because all the other wallets are all about like, how can I make you, connect to all the apps and like basically be your entry point to the ecosystem. Our focus is really like internal. It's like, how can we build like these features that will make kind of solve 80% of your needs in terms of what you need to do on chain within just this one app with clicks, as opposed to you kind of taking an extension and doing things or using a mobile browser. So I think that's definitely one of the kind of bigger areas of focus. And it's interesting to hear that you'd like the same for Squads as we are thinking about kind of future roadmap and features.
Yeah, I think we had Dan Romero on the show, and I think his statement was something like, if you're doing consumer and you don't have a mobile app, you're not going to make it. And so going mobile first is underlooked, but super important. But yeah, that's all I got. Actually, why don't we let Garrett close this one out to bring back the memes?
Do you still do rapid fire in the show, Mert?
No.
Oh, lame. Okay.
Our aliens are real.
Actually, we're going to close out, but I want one question. Specifically, Dan, I'm going to ask you, filling in my shoes now. You're obviously ingrained in the Solana community now. What is something that you think we're missing that you see in either Ethereum land or with L2s and Cosmos? Like what do we need to get better at?
Really simple, usable block explorers. For people, I think there's two sets of users. There's one that is the user that will never touch a block explorer. And that is, we need to build for that user. But there is like this in between of people who want to understand what's happening with a transaction or an action or their funds. That is not a developer. Like there is an in between. So we have like very, very simple users on the far right, developers on the far left, and the entire spectrum in between is not a small minority. They need to be advocated for, largely because a great example of this is, I think the best form of marketing a protocol can do today is getting people touching their data and illustrating the growth of their own protocol. And that becomes very, very hard to do when the standard landing page for Ethereum, when you go look at a contract or any EVM chain, is you go to Etherscan, you click the contract tab, the deployer has uploaded the code, you check the compiled bytecode, and it verifies. And then that gets displayed on the page. You know everything that contract is doing or that program is doing. You can read and write directly to that contract from the block explorer and interact with the chain in a different way. I honestly think that is a huge gap in the Solana ecosystem today. And I would honestly expand that even one step further into just the data side of Solana today. I think we're making meaningful progress, and token extensions are much more trackable than some of the issues with SPL tokens. But it is still it's not perfect. So that'd be my answer, is we need more transparency is largely what it boils down to. So it's great to see that you guys are pushing forward formal verification and things of this nature and immutability. But Garrett, I tend to agree with your point earlier around immutability. Like there will be centralized entities that build on chain, and that's okay. There will be non-immutable things. And again, going back to the original point of crypto provides optionality. And I think that's the beautiful thing.
Yeah, that's actually why we started Helios. It was human readable APIs, and we built X-Ray to be an explorer for people who aren't developers. And now we're reworking it. So Totally hear that. I'm super annoyed by it too.
Fan of mutability, but if you have a contract on Solana, a program, it should be behind a multi-sig, and that's why you should use squads. I'll close this out. I'll just say it's super fun to be back on the show. Dan was the perfect host to come in here. Even before I knew that I wasn't going to be doing Lightspeed anymore, I wanted Dan to join the roundups with me and Mert, because I was like, this guy is just like a data wizard. Also really cool. Was like one of my best friends at Blockworks. So Mert, it's fun to be back on with you and kind of have a homecoming. And Stepan, thanks for coming on. Step's an absolute legend, product mind. We have 3 founders at Squads, and they're all legends in a different way, from like the CEO to completely product focused to then the technical background. So it's been a really fun team to be part of and be deep in the Solana ecosystem. So Step, you have any closing words?
Use Fuse.
Use Fuse, stay based. All right, guys. We'll see you next time.
I love it. Thanks for having me on, Garrett.
See you guys.